Hello, everybody. I'm Paula Farmer, and welcome to a very special edition of Book Passage's Conversations with Authors. And by authors, tonight, I mean multiple authors. Thank you so much for joining us and supporting Book Passage by attending virtual events like this, as well as our in-store events, which we have gotten back up and running. So definitely check our website to make sure you're coming to a virtual event or you need to be there in person. We keep everything updated on the website. Also keep in mind for tonight that we would love it if you would be especially engaged by participating in the chat section with your comments and your questions. I promise we will be getting to them. And today's book is right behind me to the side here, and it's paperback. So we have plenty of these at our San Francisco store, our Corte Madera location. Please come by the store, call, or send us an email. We'd be happy to get one of these in your hands. And you do want this one, especially for people who appreciate short stories. This is a fabulous collection, one of the best I've ever read, and definitely one of the highlights of 2022 as far as literature goes. So here you go. Also keep in mind when you support our events and you buy the books, you keep the local independent bookstore communities alive and well, and you keep the authors doing what they do best, writing. So let's keep up with that. Tonight's featured book, Small Odysseys, is a shorts collection, has the contribution of not just one or two writers, but at least 35. There might be more. We'll find out for sure what that number is. And these are a combination of established writers, well-known, very loved, beloved, and up-and-coming emerging authors. It's a great combination of authors, and the stories include a wide cast of characters and enlightening and entertaining literary journeys. Here to take us on this journey is someone who is no stranger to the short genre. Hannah Tinty is the author of the best-selling novel, The Good Thief, and the story collection, Animal Crackers, and many, many more, most of which are award-winning. She is the co-founder and executive editor of One Story magazine, and she teaches creative writing in New York University's MFA program. Please welcome tonight, in your very capable hands, I'm passing it over to Hannah.
Thanks, Paula. And thanks everybody for tuning in, whether you are watching this live or you are watching it later. We really appreciate you coming to take part in this celebration of selected shorts. So first I'm going to say my neighbors are moving. So as in all things Zoom, if occasionally you hear loud things being dragged across the floor, that's just what's happening. I don't have a dead body or something weird happening in my house. It's just, you know, furniture being moved. So that's just, you know, how we roll these days. But I wanted to just say that I'm so happy to be here, and I love Book Passage. I've done some great events there in the past. I'm sure everybody here has, and please buy the book, buy it at Book Passage, buy other books there. It's just a fantastic place. So I'm going to start with just a little bit about what Selected Shorts is, because as we've been doing these events, I'm understanding that not everybody is actually familiar with the program. So Selected Shorts began, the first show was actually in 1985. And the idea for it started in 1984. So Kay Catarula, who worked at Symphony Space in New York City, had this idea about actors reading short stories on stage. And she brought it to the director, Isaiah Sheffer, who became Selected Shorts' longtime host on the radio. And it just became this magnificent thing where actors were performing short stories. And I started listening to the program long ago when I was in high school and then all throughout college. And there's just something really different about the experience. It's different than listening to an audiobook, because when you're listening to a story that's being performed on Selected Shorts, you feel like you're part of the audience because it's being recorded live on Broadway in front of an audience. And to have a piece performed on that stage is like one of the huge, wonderful accomplishments of any writer. And we're going to have a chance to talk to those writers. Some of them have been, who've now at this point all been performed on stage at Symphony Space together. So this book, Small Odysseys, is a celebration of 35 years of selected shorts that they've been doing the program, having it performing on stage and also on radio shows, and now it's a podcast, and it's just like, it's a wonderful program and organization. So the writers were all commissioned to write pieces, brand new short stories specifically for this book. And I was brought on board to help sort of organize it all and kind of put the pieces together. And for about 3 years, back when Isaiah was the host of Selected Shorts, I was the literary commentator, but I always joke that my real title was Isaiah's sidekick, because I would just get the opportunity to sort of like be on the side, and like I always felt like I was doing like a shuffle dance next to him. But it was really fun. Sometimes I'd pull out my ukulele and we'd sing a song. It was really sort of like vaudeville, and just such a great experience for me. So to come back, to be asked to come back and take part in this, to just sort of celebrate Selected Shorts by the team, was just really moving for me, and I'm so happy to get us started. So a little bit about the book. One of the things is, as a listener of Selected Shorts, what I love, I'd often go out and I'd seek out those stories after I'd heard them on the radio, or when I went to a performance on stage. I want to read them afterwards. So that actually led me to so many great writers, discovering their work, experiencing them, and actually going back and reading those stories for a second, third, fourth time. So what this book, Small Odysseys, does is actually, it's almost like a bridge between the performance and the written word. And that's also one of the things that's so special about it. And when we were trying to figure out how to put all these different pieces together, I started thinking about how any short story, whether you're reading it on the page or whether you're experiencing it on stage or whether you're just listening to it, having someone read it to you, or you're listening to it on the radio, it's really about a journey or an exploration of a brand new world. You take the hand of the writer and you step into that world together. So I thought about organizing it like a journey, like an odyssey. And so I broke the book into 3 sections, and that's departures, journeys, and new worlds. So the writers that we have here today each have stories in those different sections. So I thought we'd just start by actually having them each read a little bit. And we're going to start with the first part of the book, which is departures. So I called this part departures because to start any journey, you actually have to say goodbye to things. And it's about leaving the known world. And so our first reader is going to be Elizabeth Crane, and I'm going to introduce you, Elizabeth, or Betsy, I should say, Betsy. So here we go. Elizabeth Crane is the author of several short story collections, including Turf and When the Messenger is Hot, which was adapted for the stage by Chicago Steppenwolf Theater Company, as well as the novels The History of Great Things and We Only Know So Much, which was adapted into a feature film. Crane teaches at the UCR Palm Desert Low Residency MFA program, and a memoir is forthcoming in 2022. What's the name of the memoir? Do we have a title or a pub date yet?
Yes, the pub date is August 9th. It's called This Story Will Change.
Excellent, thank you. So Betsy's going to read from her fantastic story, Unicorn Me.
Thank you, Hannah. All right. I picture a unicorn. The meditation guide says to picture a glowing spiritual being like the Buddha or Mother Mary or whoever, and then to picture that being in a scenario that's troubling you. I picture the moment my husband told me he wanted to investigate with another woman, a textile artist we knew casually. It seems my husband had hoped to investigate and also be married to me, which is not an idea I'm personally into. I've always said that people should configure their relationships in whatever way floats their boats. You want to have 6 boats in your marriage? Have at it. I want 2 boats. This was always our agreement.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. So I'm going to return to talk to you more about that story, but let's continue on our journey. Next, we're going to go to the second part of the book, which I called Journeys. And so the stories in the journey sections are really about people who are in transition or at a place of movement, a place of change in their lives. So, new things are happening to them. And so first we're going to hear from Jess Walter from his story, Love Interest. But I'm going to introduce Jess first. And Jess, I don't know whether you watched the live stream of the launch of the book, but I got to introduce you on stage too, and Hugh Dancy, which I'll tell a funny story about him later in this, but it was really fun. So Jess Walter is the author of 7 novels, most recently the 2020 national bestseller, The Cold Billions. Among his other novels are Beautiful Ruins, a 2012 #1 New York Times bestseller, The Zero, a 2006 finalist for the National Book Award, and Citizen Vince, winner of the 2005 Edgar Award. His short fiction has appeared 3 times in Best American Short Stories, as well as Harper's, Esquire, and many others, and is collected in the books We Live in Water and the forthcoming Famous Actors. So when is Famous Actors coming out, Jess?
It's actually now called The Angel of Rome.
Okay, as all things, titles change.
Titles change, and it comes out in June. So yeah, June 28th.
Fantastic. So can you read the beginning of Love Interest for us?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Hannah. And I miss the ukulele. I want to hear that again. Love interest. When people find out I'm a private investigator, they often make fun of me. Oh, can I see your gun? You want to stake out? Ever shoot anyone? See, my gun is a computer. I'm a digital forensics expert who spends his days digging up and decoding financial records. I know what the snarky attorneys here at the firm call me, Nerdlock Holmes, 00 dweeb. I work for a group of Southern California divorce lawyers. It's my job to figure out where rich guy has hidden his wealth from trophy wife, or I help rich guy hide his wealth from trophy wife. Either way, it's all cider stakeouts, phony trusts, offshore accounts, shell corporations. Every once in a while, I'll get called in to find trophy wife's deleted texts or rich guy's naked selfies. But by the time it gets to me, by the time a divorce gets to my desk, usually no one cares about that stuff. It's all about the money. It's not a sexy job, is what I'm saying, at least until she came in.
Woo! All right, thanks, Jess. That was great. I've got lots of questions about that story as well. But we're going to continue on part 2, which is Journeys. And we're going to have Susan Paribeau come and read from her story, The Project. But first, a little bit about Susan. She is the author of the short story collections, Who I Was Supposed to Be and Why They Run the Way They Do, and the novels The Broken Places and The Fall of Lisa Bellow. Her fiction has been anthologized in Best American Short Stories, Pushcart Prize Stories, and New Stories from the South, and has appeared in numerous magazines, including One Story, Glimmer Train, the Iowa Review, and the Missouri Review, and The Sun. She is writer in residence and professor of creative writing at Dickinson College and on the faculty of Queen's University. So welcome, Susan. Let's hear a little bit of The Project.
All righty, thank you, Hannah. The Project. 1 question. You should see my wife with the ruler. My God, the precision as she bends over the flat stovetop, the best light, that incandescent dome, dispensing her perfect, nearly invisible lines with the freshly sharpened pencil. I am careless in all things, and it's rarely more apparent than in this familiar endeavor. The kids in bed, the trifold board still nearly a blank canvas, the lies told to each other about how it's mostly our daughter's work, how we're just doing the brainless part, the presentation, measuring, cutting, gluing, assembling her findings in a way that approximates how an above average 5th grader might do things. A 5th grader that, fried from the particular exhaustion of weeks of procrastination and a ribbon on the line, was sent to bed in tears at midnight, leaving her parents to finish up her science project. I am useless. I might as well be in bed myself because there's no pretending I have a meaningful role in this. I prepare and deliver a cup of coffee, then step away. I ask from a safe distance, anything I can do? There is not anything I can do.
I love that story. Thank you, Susan. That was fantastic. So our last reader is going to be Rabi Alameddin. He is the author of the novels Kool-Aid's I, the Divine, the Hakawati, An Unnecessary Woman, The Angel of History, and the story collection The Perv. His novel, The Wrong End of the Telescope, was released in September 2021 and is full of awards and accolades. Rabi, I'm so glad you were able to be a part of this anthology. Can you read to us from The Prom Terrorists?
Sure can. The Prom Terrorists. No matter what my baby sister says, I don't want you to think I'm stupid. But no one seems to think that maybe the FBI is stupid, or maybe it wasn't my fault, but my parents, since they suddenly decided that I needed to find a job and move out because only losers still lived with their parents at 28. And that was when I said they meant slacker and not loser, but they didn't know what slacker meant since English is their second language. And I said that if we were back in the old country, which is something they always said, I would be living at home until I got married, at which point they'd have to buy a house for my wife and me. But we were in the hellhole known as Fresno, which was better than the shithole where they were born, but not by much if you ask me. So I was feeling stressed when the FBI letter arrived with my name on it, telling me that they were looking for someone with my language skills to help fight extremism and terrorism at home.
Thank you, Rabi. So we were talking about this before this began, that like that short story is actually a single sentence. So it was hard to find where we were going to break it, but I'm excited. I can't wait for other people to have the wonderful opportunity to read that story. So one of the things that we decided to do for Small Odysseys was to ask each of the writers who contributed a piece to also include a little author's note to sort of give the readers a peek behind the curtain, to talk a little bit about where the idea for their pieces came from. And you all contributed those as well. So I want to ask each of you a little bit about that, a little bit about the idea behind the story. So Betsy, let's start with you for Unicorn Me. So this started with a meditation app, actually, that you were using, and sort of like this idea of healing and visualization. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wish I could remember. I was struggling in the aftermath of my husband and I splitting up, and someone suggested this meditation app, and it was a guided meditation, and it asked me to think of a spiritual being, and maybe I'm not that spiritual, and so I couldn't think of any. Like a unicorn was the first thing that popped into my mind, and it didn't really work. I didn't find any kind of spiritual salvation or enlightenment, but I got a story idea out of it.
Sometimes that's all the healing you need, right?
Exactly.
Something for a story. And I need to ask, this is, well, maybe I'll hold that because I'm interested in, because these were all commissioned pieces, right? So you guys were starting from scratch for these. But let's talk more about these, which I just love. They're like my favorite parts of the story, and they come after the story. So it's right after you've had the experience of reading it, you just get this little opportunity of this deeper insight into it. So Jess, your story, Love Interest, was originally sparked by 1940s noir and Hollywood, and sort of wanting to replicate that, sort of almost like a spoof on the whole Sam Spade thing. So can you talk a little bit about that? All right, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. I think this is the fourth story I've had on Selected Shorts, and every time I listen to them, I think I should write something for an actor to read. I should think about that. So I was really thinking about 40s radio and the click of heels down the hallway, and I could almost do Foley for my story. And then my wife got this email, one of those phishing emails that claimed that they had used her Facebook page to make porn, and we tried to order. We're like, we want to see that. We thought that sounded like a great bit of entertainment. And so, yeah, I just sort of folded that in. The kind of the last piece, my son had found the John Travolta name generator where he messed up Idina Menzel's name at the Academy Awards so badly that you can put your name in and it tells you what John Travolta would call you. So my son, Alec Bruce Welter, came out as Argyle Borfus. And so that became the villain of the story. So yeah, I was just sort of sitting around with the family and kicking around, this whole story idea. And often I grew up next to a drive-in movie theater, and I watched all those movies over the fence. And so I have when I think aspiration, I almost always find myself picturing a tiny little movie screen over an aluminum fence. So those were sort of the pieces that went into the story. And it was a thrill to hear an actor read it. It really was. It was so much better than the story. I feel like I owe him $40 or something.
I have to say, introducing Hugh Dancy, so I didn't know that he has a slew of fans who are called Fanables.
Yes, yeah, because he was on a show
and they
called
wear
Hannibal.
like flower crowns.
Yeah.
I have not watched Hannibal, so I don't know the reference to that. But somehow, I when I got off stage, I suddenly was getting all these tags because I introduced him, and it was just like I had no idea that there was this like crew of women who showed up with these like flower crowns on, and they were all like #Fannibal, Hugh Dancy, blah 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 blah, selected shorts. It was awesome. They were outside. He like went and took pictures with them. They were so happy. They all went to brunch. They were tagging me all day long, and I was like, look at these delightful women who are just into crime and short stories.
Yeah, no, totally. And man, he nailed it too. I mean, he was so charming.
If only I'd known, I would have worn a flower crown.
Yeah.
So Susan, let's talk a little bit about the project. So I loved the way this was broken into different sections. As a sciencey person, and I actually majored in science in school and did a lot of these science fair projects. But this is really also a story about a marriage and about a family. And can you talk just a little bit about, did you originally think of the, breaking it down, like actually into the different parts of actual science experiment?
Yeah, I started with, I wrote it almost as a joke first. The story came from just this frustration of working on these projects, and the frustration I saw of parents around me working on them and losing their minds over it. And so I just wrote it as kind of just a funny one-off kind of thing. And then I realized that there was some story there that I hadn't seen at first, and that it wasn't about me or my daughter's science project or any of my friends whose kids were doing these science projects, but that it was about these people who were struggling with something that was challenging and overwhelming, and that I could kind of get at that through the science project. So the structuring of the story, again, initially it was sort of meant to just be a way of, a way of kind of working this idea of the science project into the story. But then it started to make sense structurally as sort of the emotional rising action between them.
I know, it's just like, it's an experiment. Short stories are a kind of experiment, right? And so actually the structure of it worked perfectly. But it was really fun having a story like yours that was, again, breaking rules. I love stories that break rules. And another one that breaks rules is Robbie's story, The Prom Terrorists. So Robbie, this started with like a possible screenplay, and then also things that like the FBI was actually sending letters to people with foreign sounding names to try to recruit them, right? So
Yes,
can you talk
yes.
a little bit about this?
Sure. I had a friend, he had made a couple of Hollywood movies, and he wanted to work on one of my novels, and I didn't think it would turn into a novel. And I said, why don't we try something else? So we started brainstorming. And the FBI at the time, this was 2002, 2003, were sending out letters to anybody with a Muslim sounding name, trying to recruit them to come become FBI agents. So I had this idea of what if they recruited somebody who just did not have the language skills and would proceed to fuck up everything. And that was the idea for the story. And like I said, I played with it for 20 years, but I don't write screenplays, so I was never able to write it down. And then this came along. It's like, oh, this might work.
It totally works. And not only that, but like the real hero of the story, which is the protagonist's sister, who's just trying to get laid.
Just trying to get laid, and everybody gets in her way. Yeah, no, actually, from the beginning, for me, the main protagonist was the sister. You know, that here's this young girl who just wants to get laid, and the FBI and the Muslims and her brother and everybody gets in the way.
So I'd want to ask each of you, you know, you've all had your pieces performed on stage by Selected Shorts and probably other places as well. And you were writing these pieces for performance. I know, Jess, you talked about thinking about the voice, right, to do that. So first of all, I want to ask everybody two questions. One is just sort of, what is it like to be an audience member listening to your work being performed by someone else? I know the first time that happened to me, it felt very strange. But also exciting, right? And then the second thing is, well, let's start there. Let's start with that question. Then I get to say, so what is it like being in the audience or listening to have someone else perform your work? Who would like to go first? Somebody jump in. Betsy, what was it like for you?
I mean, it is strange. And like my first Selected Shorts was probably one of the first times that I ever heard somebody else read my work. And that's going way back now. But having said that, like, it never gets old. Like, it's just like somebody's like something I wrote is coming out of somebody's mouth. Like, what? And you know, the people that like the talent that
Miriam Shore, right, who performed.
Miriam Shore, and they wrote a song to go with my story for this one, which was performed by Maddie Corman so brilliantly that I was just like, well, obviously I need a whole musical now, because that was it was amazing. You know, it was just like the greatest thing ever.
It was really, really fantastic. And Susan, so you had the joy of having your piece performed by Michael Shannon.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I usually don't like to hear my work read aloud. I feel really, I get really cringy, and it has nothing to do with the performance at all. It's just like, for me, it's like watching myself on the screen like I am right now. You know, that I just, it makes me feel strange and violated somehow. And so, but Michael Shannon just blew me away. I could not believe the performance of the story, and he elevated it. What Jess said, you know, that I felt the same way. Like the story is so much better coming out of Michael Shannon's mouth than it would have been coming out of mine or that it was on the page. So yeah, it was almost like I felt like I hadn't written it, which was the real pleasure of listening to it, was that it became something else.
And Robbie, I remember you sent me an email a few weeks before the performance being like, do you know who's going to perform my piece yet? Do you know who's going to? And I was like, I don't know. You got to talk to Jenny. I don't know. But did you have a chance to see Robbie Marsumian's a performance of the piece? And what did you think?
I thought it was amazing, which for me is, I mean, I usually, like Susan, I hate hearing my stories a lot. Audiobooks drive me crazy, not just mine, but any kind of audiobooks, just me. But it's funny because every time somebody at Symphony Space reads something of mine, it sounds really good. And I think Rafi was just amazing. I mean, totally stunning. Yeah, he should do it all the time, I think.
I feel like sometimes, like when you have an actor like Rafi who does such an amazing job, yeah. It's like, can you please go on tour with me and just read all my work?
Like, you know, yeah. And then he's so gorgeous. It's like, yes, can you be me for a little bit? Maybe I'd get more dates.
So good. So Jess, talk a little bit about, so when you were listening to Hugh Dancy read, or maybe one of the other performances of your pieces, what is the experience like for you? You gotta unmute.
Like you, I was just such a big fan of Selected Shorts always, and growing up wanting to be a writer in Spokane, Washington, that's in many ways your access to New York publishing. And so I have always wanted to be in the crowd to have one of my stories read. And every time I can't, for one reason or another, and I was supposed to be there. I would have probably gotten a flower arrangement for my head if I had. But just watching it, even watching it on that live stream was really amazing. And it really does, it's this kind of gift, because it's the best version of the thing that you wrote. He would give these pauses, and I think, I wish I could put that pause and that, I wish I could have a character stammer, but when you write stammering in, it always looks sort of terrible. He just sort of intuitively understood the character. And I have an actor friend who I sometimes will have table read my stories in bits of novels. And it's wild to hear. I mean, you really bring something else when you talk to someone whose job it is to bring a character to life. And so that's what I felt. It was just, you feel like you're part of something far better than you normally produce. And I don't know why it's better than audiobooks, but it does seem like that. When I listen to an audiobook, it's like watching someone make out with my wife. No matter how well they do it, I just keep thinking, that's not how I would do it. There's just something awkward about it.
I totally agree. I think it's the audience.
Yeah, maybe.
I think it's because they're performing in front of an audience, and there's the vibe that happens in live theater is somehow captured in the sound, even in the silence of the audience.
Yeah.
Even when they're not.
And it breathes a little more too. You feel those pauses, and you really do feel the room. And I've always thought that, even listening.
More than you do when you're reading it, I find. Like sometimes you can have a sense of the audience, but it definitely, when you're sitting in the audience hearing them, you can also take in like the response of the audience. So I'm a little out of body when I'm the one standing up there.
Also, the expressions and the gestures of the actor that I think separates it from listening to an audiobook, that you do, it's a performance. It feels like a performance.
Yeah, it feels alive. It feels alive in a new way. So that's what I think is so exciting about Selected Shorts, and and having these new stories to experience that. And now they were all performed on stage for the launch of the book, and now they're all going to be on the radio and on the podcast in the next couple of weeks and months. So one thing I did want to ask, since these are all commissioned pieces, did you think about, I know Jess did, thinking about the sound that someone would perform it, did you approach the story in a different way? So I've asked this at every event, and I will tell you, almost every writer said no, they were just trying to get it done. So you tell me whether or not you thought about it.
I did.
Yeah,
I definitely did. That's why I was interested in who was going to read it. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole idea of, I wanted somebody to read it who could do stoned out of his mind, kind of. And I don't know if I would be able to do it, but I was hoping that, I had it. It's like, it's a monologue. I had it as a monologue on stage. Somebody goes on stage and starts doing all this thing. But also, just before one of the things that we didn't talk about, and partly I think is the reason that Symphony Space's short stories work better than audiobooks, is also better actors.
Better actors, yes. They have such a huge, amazing roster of actors who just pop by, and I will say, being backstage on the 26th when they were doing this, they are all friends, because it's New York actors who are, either in plays or they were on television, or they've been in movies, but they all know each other. So there was a real camaraderie with people coming and going every 20 minutes, but everyone's like, oh, hey, and it just felt like, really, just like Symphony Space kind of feels like a family. That group of actors who returns and reads there is also like a kind of family. So it's good. Anybody else? Susan, did you write yours, or Betsy, did you write yours specifically thinking of an actor?
No. I mean, no. I have written stories. By the time I got to my third collection, I was like, I had made my stories so hard to read out loud because I just wasn't thinking that I would ever have to do that. And So when I wrote my third collection, I was just like, I got to write some stories that I can read, that anybody could read. But not in this, not really. I mean, I think I just, thought about first person just because I might be fun for an actor, but not much beyond that.
Yeah, I didn't think about it either, although I wish I had. And what Jess said, because I've had a couple stories performed before on selected shorts, and it really is, it's such a gift that now I'm thinking, okay, next time I'm gonna remember that. I'm gonna remember that's part of what I'm writing for. Because again, until Michael Shannon started reading, I didn't think, oh yeah, I could have thought it. I could have had him in mind, or someone like him in mind.
I should defend audiobooks just because one of the reasons that I wanted to do that is Eduardo Ballerini, who's done a few of my audiobooks, is so great. And I had a few that I couldn't listen to, and then hearing him really made me think differently about that process. But then I wrote this story thinking, oh, well, it'll be like noir. And then I heard all these amazing monologues, and I thought, oh, actors are going to want these great deep characters to play. And I'd written, scenes and tried to write a tiny novel, and suddenly I really had writer envy. I just thought some of the pieces in the book I thought are just like, if I was an actor, they're just such profound, great meals to bite into. So I think that's one of the cool things about the stories you pulled together, Hannah, is that you have such range like that.
And that actually brings me to a question that's come up in our chat. So now I'd like to just, put the word out there. Anybody who's listening or watching, please put your questions in. We're going to do our best to answer some of them before we, draw this to a close. So one of the questions actually has to do about short stories. This is from Paula. For those of you who have or usually write novels, what are the specific different challenges in writing short instead of writing long? So I'm going to sort of like dovetail that a little bit into what Jess was just talking about, because the diversity of like style and form and like what people are doing in this collection are, it's so interesting, because it's, there are straight, sort of basic straightforward stories in this, and then there are ones that are more like monologues, or there's one that's written in like in the form of a commercial for a bidet, or for a touchless bidet. There is, there's just like all kinds of crazy things going on. There's one that's a translation of a language that doesn't exist. So this is, there's all these risks and sort of interesting things. So it's sort of like this idea of like, what is a short story? What makes a short story for each of you? And for those of you who've written, I think you've all written both forms, you've all written both novels and short stories. Like, how do you move between the two? So who wants to talk about what a short story is? How does it feel different when you're writing it?
I'll go first. I mean, the process of writing, I think, feels the same, but I do think you're onto something about the idea of experimentation, and I think of it as play. Like when I start a short story, it's like a guitar sitting in the corner, and I sit up, grab it, and start strumming, looking for lines and chords and things that, and there's so much less at stake. I sometimes joke that, writing a novel is like getting married, and writing short stories is like dating. It's kind of nice, if it doesn't work out, you can ask out another short story. And so especially after finishing a novel, I find it great to just have that playful, experimentation with voice, trying new things. And then when they work, they have a power that still stuns me. I had to build toothpick bridges with one of my kids. I was thinking of your story, Susan, and one of the science fair projects was to build a toothpick bridge where you have to have the least tensile mass possible that will hold the most weight. And a short story is like that. It's in a few pages, you can be you can be moved in the way you can with a novel, and when that weird thing happens, it's, I don't know, a more satisfying kind of writing.
I would say one of my favorite quotes about a story, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but is something that Poe said about having your reader's full and undivided attention for the duration of the story, which is unlike when you read a novel, you read it and you get up and you do things and then you come back to it. But that I really love having the opportunity to not just completely invest myself as a writer, but to have the reader completely invest in the world for a very brief time. He's mine or she's mine. And then it's over. Then he's out. Then she's out. There's an intensity to that experience, both for the writer and for the reader, that is really fulfilling for me.
I think that's what I think is the magic of a short story and the magic of hearing one, read. It's like you have a complete artistic experience in like 10 or 15 minutes, where you're like taken on a complete emotional, movement. And that is incredibly unique, except for maybe listening to a song, right? Or something like, something very short, but it's a completely different thing. Betsy, what are your thoughts moving between?
Well,
short
so
stories
I will always sort of think of myself as a story writer first. And I think, I know for me, I don't think this is a universally true, but I think for me, I play with form a lot, and I know I can sustain that in a shorter framework than I can over a long period. Although that said, one of my novels is pretty experimental also, but novels, I really, the only way that I got either of my novels written was thinking that I thought I was writing a short story and they just ran long. So like, oh, I guess this 30-page story that's now 60 pages that I'm not going to sell anywhere because nobody wants a 60 or 90-page short story. I better just keep writing it. But, I love to get lost in like a more compact life that someone creates on the page. I love stories. Stories have my heart.
I feel like there's also sometimes like more weight. It has the pressure, like a little bit like Jess was talking about, the pressure on the sentences, than a novel. Like there's because like every sentence has to do so much work. For sure. Robbie, how about you? How do you approach a short story differently?
I'm probably weird in that I'm not sure I approach them differently. I tend to start writing not knowing what it is. Sometimes it turns out to be a short story, and everybody hates it. And sometimes it turns out to be a short story and everybody likes it. But the idea for me is that if something holds my attention for a long time, that becomes a novel. I can almost say that, not everyone, but a lot of the novels that I've wrote started out as short stories. That I wrote the short story, I liked it, it gets published, and it won't let go. It just won't let go. It won't let go. So I keep doing it. But when I start, I don't start, because most of the time I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I don't start.
Same, Robbie.
Just don't know what I'm doing. So sometimes they turn out to be stories. Sometimes they turn out to be nothing. But I can tell you that I write what I'm obsessed with. And if the obsession lasts, it's a novel. If it doesn't last, it's either a short story or a failure.
I remember listening to a great interview with Elizabeth McCracken, who's a great short story writer, and she talked about she was talking about writing fiction in terms of like creating a diorama, like in a museum of natural history. So she's like, you've got you've got the stuffed moose, and then you've got like the paintings, and like and all other sort of stuff, and that you're creating this illusion of depth. Of the diorama, of creating basically a whole universe that someone's like sitting there and sort of watching. And she said, and the novel is like all this work that you're doing to like create an entire world that seems real. She's like, and a short story is like half a duck that's like stuck on the wall. Like it's half a duck. That's what you get, like half a duck's jammed into the wall. And like, that just felt like Yes, that's what a short story is. Like, it's the half a duck that's like between the full duck and the painted ducks. That somehow that made it click for me. I don't know what it is. It's so funny. We've got another question coming in. Do you feel publishers give enough love to short story collections? This is from Brian, as they do with novels and other genres. If not, why? And how can we get more people in and out of the business to appreciate shorts? I'll tell you, it's a numbers game. I can say from being on the other end of the spectrum. There's a great essay that I always direct people to by Lincoln Michel, that is everything you've ever wanted to know about publishing, but we're afraid to ask, where he breaks down the numbers of novels versus short stories and all that. I would recommend looking up that article. I think it first appeared in Electric Literature, but it's in various places now, and it's really a numbers game. So it's because short story collections don't sell as many copies, so they don't make as much money, so publishers don't pay as much attention to them. But luckily, I do think that there are things like, for example, the Story Prize, which Brandon Taylor just won, which I'm very excited about. I think there's more attention being paid to short stories these days. But anybody else want to chime in on that? How can we make people care about short stories more? You can buy this book. That's one thing you can do. What
you
else?
have to make readers care more than publishers. It's like publishers will follow readers. It's most readers, I don't know why. I mean, one assumed that we have less attention span now, so that people would be reading more short stories, but it doesn't seem to be so. And, they don't read more poetry either. It's just like, I don't know why, but if you want publishers to love short stories, read short stories.
I always think that about the attention span, I keep waiting for stories to kind of become more popular. I've been waiting for many, many years. And I just feel like some readers and maybe most readers, really like the long-term immersion of reading. And it's not that they hate stories or that they run from them, but just that, that what they're seeking in their reading is not the brief, intense experience, but rather the long haul. And I haven't given up, but I've sort of decided, okay, it's all right that story collections aren't on the bestseller list. It's okay. We'll be all right.
And they do get on there sometimes. And I think that, I can just say, having read one story, we just had our 20th anniversary, which is insane, that we started that magazine 20 years ago, and that we're still going, and that we're completely independent. And we started it with like $3,000 that Mary Beth Bacha got as like a bonus from her, job. And we still are in business, and there's so many people who love it and, just want to read short stories every month. So there is an audience out there, but I do feel like short stories are almost like there's like poetry, the poets, right, who are just like super in it for the love, and that is like high art, right? And then there's there's other kinds of books. I mean, not that novels and bigger books aren't that, but I feel like stories are a little bit leaning a little bit more towards poetry, which is like a different kind of art, that you're truly doing it for the love and for the experience. But I do think that organizations like Selected Shorts, like One Story, like coming to events like this, and the Story Prize, I will say, and Best American Short Stories and the O. Henry Prize stories, all they do is, they just, I think they build more readers for short fiction. So we're sort of going to start drawing this to a close, but we still have some other questions coming in. And I'm going to throw this last one out at you all. So somebody asked, who are writers or books that have influenced your writing? So I'd love to just go around and have everybody maybe share that. And then I also want to also say, what maybe a book that has influenced you. Let's close with this: a book that has influenced you, and maybe, because I know there's probably a lot of writers who are listening to this, and I think that one of the things that was really prevalent, and anybody who reads this book, you'll see how much this is not a pandemic book. The stories are all over the place, and they're talking about a lot of things. Because most of them, they were commissioned at the beginning of the pandemic and written during the pandemic. There's definitely the vibe or the feeling, the struggle that a lot of writers were facing, I think, is there on the page. I could feel it as they were coming in and reading it. And sometimes you can sort of feel like, I think every writer faces this feeling of like, why would anybody care? Why is this important? You know, especially given the universe and the daily horrors that we're facing, it seems. But I do also strongly feel that, you know, as one of the reviews of this book came out, that stories ultimately will save us. There's a power in them, and there's a power in writing them, and there's a power in sharing them. So could each of you maybe share a book that has a story or a book that has helped you with that, or felt powerful to you?
I mean, I just recently reread Edward P. Jones's Lost in the City, and I love his stories so much. And when I'm, as a writer, sometimes when I'm looking to get inspired, it's through story writers. You know, I'll go read Alice Munro or Toby Wolfe or somebody, and it makes me want to be a writer again. You know, sometimes when I read novels that I love, it just fills me with jealousy. But when I read stories, great story collections, and just rereading Edward P. Jones's was just reminding me how important he was to me as a writer.
Other books or stories that have meant a lot to people?
Do you want books? I mean, novels or just stories?
It could be anything, either one. You tell me,
Oh.
Robbie.
Well, stories, I mean, Chekhov, I mean, who are we kidding? Novels, I mean, there were so many writers. I hate that question because depending on my mood, I can come up with 5 or 6. But the one novel that changed my life was A House for Mr. Biswas by V.S. Naipaul, because it was the first time I was 16 in the boarding school in England, and I hated every minute of it. And it was the first time I read a novel where the protagonist were, shall we say, third world people, and they weren't the maids or the help. And I realized that, you know, my story can be important. And yeah, it changed my life.
I think Lydia Davis was someone that was a big influence on me when I started writing short stories. Like, she was sort of in a category of people that I was like late to reading stuff that just like super excited me. And that was like, my writing improved once I started reading some more things that I was excited about. But it was people that were sort of doing something a little bit like Rick Moody, that were sort of like, oh, I've been writing like that, but I didn't think I really could write like that. And so, you know, I would fix all of those things and fix all of the interest, what was interesting about my work, kind of right out of it, until I started reading some people that were playing around a little bit more.
Susan, how about you? Any influences or stories that made you, you know, changed everything for you?
Yeah, I would jump on the Chekhov train as well. I mean, I go back to those stories again and again, and I think that what you said, quoting the review that stories will save us, I think you see that in Chekhov. I think Chekhov felt that, and I think that the timelessness of those stories and students' abilities, even young students, you know, undergraduates' abilities to sort of connect with those characters, really shows that these are stories that need to be told, and this is something that is worth our time, both as writers and as readers.
I couldn't agree more, because I feel like, you know, with any kind of storytelling, but particularly with short stories, and particularly the stories in this book, you know, it's about dropping down into a moment about what it means to be a human being and that experience, which is very, very hard to capture. And yet somehow all the writers, all 35 writers in this book, and all of you, thank you. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Jess, for coming, for first of all, contributing amazing works of short fiction for this book, but also for coming here tonight and sharing your time and sharing your thoughts and your great wisdom with us and your book recs. So buy those books, everybody, at Book Passage, and buy this book also at Book Passage. Thank you all for coming. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Hannah. What a great job. And for all of you coming on tonight, all different times and locations, and we really appreciate it. And supporting Book Passage, independent bookstores, and writers like yourself to keep on writing. As Hannah said, the best way to keep stories like this out there in the world is to one book at a time. And here I suggest this be, maybe it's your first collection of shorts, or maybe you just haven't done it for a while. This is a good way to either start or go back to it. And, Hannah, I was thinking when you were saying, the question came up about how do we get more people kind of turned on to stories? I remember when I was in New York and covering like the New York Film Festival, I didn't think that I would be into short films. And it turns out that some of the best things I ever saw were shorts. But because I was a captured audience, what they do is before they show the feature film, they show shorts. So I think there's something there. Maybe other writers of novels, maybe they should say, you know what, we're going to have a couple short stories read before we get into talking about my novel or something.
Little amuse-bouche.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Sometimes it's the best part of the meal.
Absolutely. Well, thank you once again. Thanks to our audience. Remember, as mentioned, we do have small Odysseys at both locations of Book Passage, San Francisco, Corte Madera. You can come in safely, or you can call, or you can go online, and we'll get that to you right away. For tonight, though, thank you for everybody who contributed to this event. We really appreciate it. Everybody have a great night. Until next time. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.